On the night of December 4th, 1998, 21-year-old Yale senior Suzanne Jovin left her apartment to return a carpool key to the campus police office. She told a classmate she planned to go home afterward and get some rest. Just over 30 minutes later, Suzanne was found stabbed to death nearly 2 miles away on a street corner in a wealthy neighborhood. Detectives determined she could not have walked there in the time available, leading them to believe that she had been driven to the location by someone she knew. Despite multiple investigative efforts, that person has never been identified, and no one has ever been charged with Suzanne's murder. More than 25 years later, her case remains unsolved, and the question still lingers: who killed Suzanne Jovin? Hey everyone, welcome back to Detective Perspective. My name is Derrick Levasseur. I'm a licensed private investigator and former police detective. Each week I'll be covering an unsolved case in story format. I'll then give you my perspective on the investigation and provide contact information for the individuals or organizations connected to the case so that if you have any tips, you can contact them directly and maybe you can help solve a case. So if you're someone who's interested in true crime, specifically unsolved cases, and you would like to hear my opinion on those investigations, please consider subscribing, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever platform you use. All right, Suzanne Jovin. This is a case that I am slightly familiar with. I've definitely heard about it before. This is not one of those more obscure cases that, for most of you, it's going to be the first time hearing about it. This case did get a lot of media attention, and actually when I was doing Breaking Homicide, it was a case that we considered covering as well. For one reason or another, I can't remember exactly why. I think it was a logistics thing and Yale University not being willing to cooperate. We decided not to go that route, but it was a case that I looked into just on a surface level to see if it was something that maybe we could do something in the case to actually help it. And I do recall going through it, kind of looking at the direction that investigators went, and then knowing that with limited information and the lack of police cooperation, there wouldn't be much that Chris and I could do. So we ultimately decided not to cover it. But it doesn't mean that I'm not going to cover it here. And the reason that I'm deciding to cover it now is because the anniversary just passed, December 4th. That was the 27th anniversary. And yet, as I sit here right now, just like in every case I cover, we have no answers. No one has been held accountable. So we have two options. We can just sit here and sulk and just be mad about it and just pretend like it didn't happen, or we can continue to push forward, continue to talk about the story, and continue to seek justice not only for Suzanne, but her family. And that's what I choose to do. I feel like someone out there does know what happened, and for some reason, they haven't come forward yet. So we have to continue to talk about Suzanne and her case so that, one, people don't forget about her, but also it may rejuvenate someone's memory. I'm looking at the case and it seems like it's solvable, and yet we're approaching 30 years and nobody has been arrested for this horrific crime. As a human being, that's a problem. As a detective, that's a problem. And as a father of two girls who are going to be going to college in the not so distant future, this is unacceptable. And that's why we're covering it. I don't want to waste any more time. Let's dive into this week's case. Suzanne Jovin was born on January 26, 1977 in Germany to her parents Thomas and Donna, who were both American scientists. While growing up in Germany, Suzanne was known for her intelligence and drive. She spoke 4 languages, played multiple instruments, tutored classmates, and volunteered wherever she could. So it came as no surprise when Suzanne was accepted to Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, where she planned to study a double major in international studies and political science. In the fall of 1995, Suzanne moved to Connecticut where she started classes. She immediately found new opportunities to volunteer, joining the Yale chapter of Best Buddies, an international program that pairs students with individuals who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. Suzanne stayed involved with the organization throughout her entire time at Yale. By the late fall of 1998, Suzanne was in her first semester of her senior year, and things were going well. She was dating a guy named Roman, and she had been accepted into a competitive seminar called Strategy and Policy in the Conduct of War, and it was taught by 38-year-old instructor James Vandervelde. And James is going to become a big part of the story. You see, James had an extensive background with the State Department and held top-secret clearance. Before teaching at Yale, he served as a lieutenant commander with the U.S. Naval Intelligence Reserves, and he was considered an expert on Osama bin Laden, and I think we all know who Osama bin Laden is, unfortunately. Now, according to Vanity Fair, Suzanne enjoyed James's seminar enough that she asked him to serve as her senior essay advisor. She even chose a topic in his area of expertise. Her essay was focused on Osama bin Laden and the terrorist threat to U.S. security, where she examined the terrorist's already prominent organization. Suzanne spent months working on her essay, which was due on December 8th. She met with James several times and submitted multiple drafts for feedback and guidance. On the afternoon of December 4th, Suzanne went to James's Brewster Hall office to drop off her final draft before submission. After that, she went to volunteer with Best Buddies, where she had organized a holiday pizza party that began at around 6 p.m. at a nearby church. According to police records, Suzanne had borrowed a car from the Yale carpool to transport some of the Best Buddy participants to and from the event. Just after 8 p.m., she returned the vehicle to a parking lot on Edgewood Avenue near Howe Street. From there, she headed back to her apartment located at 256 Park Street. At 9:02 p.m., Suzanne emailed a classmate about the graduate school materials she had borrowed. She explained that she had let someone else use them and that once she got them back from that person, who was not named in the email by the way, she would return the materials. And I want to mention this unknown person in the email. They've never come forward and they've never been named publicly. Now, I will say this just to qualify, just because their name has never come out publicly by law enforcement, it doesn't mean they don't know who they are. They may be protecting that person just for their own safety. But let's just assume for this conversation that they don't know who this person is. Is there a possibility that she went and met up with this person later that evening? Absolutely. So it is something worth mentioning. So at 9:10 p.m., Suzanne logged off her computer. She then left her apartment to walk to the Yale police office at Phelps Gate on College Street to return the carpool keys, but she would never make it back home. Just over 45 minutes later, at 9:58 p.m., 21-year-old Suzanne was found face down and bleeding profusely in a grassy patch near a sidewalk at East Rock and Edge Hill, about 2 miles away from Phelps Gate in a wealthy neighborhood. It's worth noting she was still wearing all of her clothes, her jewelry, and a watch, and it doesn't appear that she had the carpool keys. I did try to confirm this. I wasn't able to do so, but as far as I know from what we have found, she no longer had the carpool keys, which is important because that would suggest that she at least made it to her first destination, which was the Yale police office. Now, Suzanne, who was barely clinging to life when she was found, was rushed to a nearby hospital where she sadly passed away. Police records state an autopsy later concluded that she had been stabbed 17 times in the head, neck, and back, and her throat was slit as well. There was no defensive wounds and no other suggestions that she struggled with the attacker. The attack had been so forceful that the tip of the knife used to kill Suzanne was still lodged in her skull. Some have theorized that the weapon could have been an X-Acto knife, while others have said it was serrated. None of these claims have been substantiated by police. New Haven detectives have never said whether tests have been done to determine exactly what type of knife was used, and that's a problem. I would say if it was an X-Acto knife, if you've ever used one, it's a really small razor blade tip, and I break them all the time just by doing arts and crafts. So the pressure of stabbing someone in the skull would absolutely break an X-Acto knife. I'd also think that a razor blade itself, if it's one of those utility ones where once a blade gets dull, it can kind of snap off, that could also be a possibility. And then, yeah, a serrated knife could be possible as well, where you have those little teeth. If it's a rusted knife or it's I guess not as good of a knife and not of a quality of a knife, one of those serrated tips could have broken off and stuck inside of her skull as well. But the real point to take here is, now we don't know what was used, and you would like to think that with 17 stab wounds, law enforcement would have a very good idea what the murder weapon looks like. And maybe they do, and they're just not saying. But I think at this point, 27 years later, maybe we could divulge a little bit more information. I don't know if I would necessarily divulge exactly what type of weapon was used. That could be used as guilt knowledge if someone does come forward, so I can understand why they wouldn't want to give everything away. But we got to give a little bit more, and I think we could at least say, yes, tests were conducted, and we do think we know what type of knife was used, but we're not going to tell you what. And there's a lot more to talk about because we do have information in this case that has been revealed, including the main suspect in this entire thing. We're going to get into it right after this break. In the world of true crime, bad habits usually lead to bad outcomes. But in real life, it doesn't have to be that way. Meet Fume, the flavored air device designed to help you ditch bad habits and feel good about what you're reaching for. No nicotine, no vapors, no batteries, just an awesome design and delicious flavors like crisp mint, peach blush, and cinnamon hearts. And it's completely clean. As I just mentioned a couple of the flavors, I personally have the peach blush in here right now. It's just natural plant-based flavored air. And also, I love the design as well. I've talked about it numerous times on this podcast. I love the feel. It has like a weighted, fidgety, friendly, twisty barrel to it. You can kind of hear it here, right? You got a little clicking magnet as well. Sometimes I got to be careful when I'm recording because I have it in my hands if I don't have a pen in my hand. And sometimes it gets a little too loud, so I got to be careful for editing purposes. But I really enjoy it, and I really like the design. It goes with my aesthetic here, so it's a keeper for me. And Fume is backed by doctors in the US and continuously invest in third-party studies to ensure the safety of all of their products. Fume has already helped over 700,000 people take steps toward better habits, and now it's your turn. Use my code DETECTIVE to get a free gift with your journey pack. All you have to do is head to tryfume.com. That's tryfum.com and use my code DETECTIVE to claim this limited time offer today. All right, so we're back, and based on the circumstances surrounding this case, detectives immediately opened a homicide investigation. Officers set up roadblocks to interview potential witnesses while the scene was processed. Unfortunately, there wasn't much that was found besides a Fresca can that was located in a nearby bush, which was collected by law enforcement along with Suzanne's fingernail scrapings. Later, the can was found to have Suzanne's fingerprints and a partial palm print of an unknown person. The palm print has never been identified, and it has never been examined for DNA. The fingernail scrapings also weren't immediately submitted for testing, and to this day, we don't know why. After processing the scene, detectives went to Suzanne's apartment, and they dialed every number on a list taped near her phone, trying to determine who she had last been with, but no one had seen her that night after the Best Buddy party. Many of her friends were out at other parties or at the movies, and her boyfriend Roman had been on his way back to New Haven after spending the evening in New York City. Hoping to learn more about what Suzanne did after leaving her apartment at 9:10 p.m., detectives spoke with Yale students and faculty and also asked the public for tips. Through these conversations, they learned that at around 9:20 p.m. on the night of the 4th, a student ran into Suzanne as she walked toward the police office. According to this witness, she said she was returning the car keys and then she planned to go back to her apartment to rest. Not going to a party, not meeting up with friends. She was going to the police office and then going back home. Police records also state that 5 minutes later, at 9:25 p.m., another student saw Suzanne on College Street near Phelps Gate. Now, the student didn't speak to her, but noticed a, quote, Hispanic or black guy in a hooded sweatshirt walking in front of Suzanne, and several paces behind her was a, quote, white guy dressed nicely, and according to this witness, he had blonde hair and wore glasses. And this was the last confirmed sighting of Suzanne. 33 minutes later, at 9:58 p.m., she was found at East Rock and Edge Hill, and she was barely alive. All right, so right now I have a map up of the location where all this went down, and for anybody who's on audio, I'll do my best to describe it to you guys, but if you have the opportunity, definitely hop over to YouTube and pull up the timestamp and take a look at this because it really does give you another dimension to this case. So we're going to start at Suzanne's apartment. It's right here in the middle of the screen. Go down the road, take your first left, and go a few blocks down, and we're going to get to College Street. Now, somewhere in this walking path here is where you have the first sighting. I don't know exactly where it is, but that's the first sighting when she actually has a conversation with another student. And that's where she says, hey, I'm just going to Phelps Gate. I'm dropping off the car keys, and then I'm going right back home. We don't know, again, exactly where that conversation took place along this road, but we know it had to be somewhere in this area here, whether she had just left the apartment or she was starting to make her way down to College Street. It had to be here because the 9:25 sighting where she didn't speak to the student is right here. And that's the sighting where allegedly this witness saw Suzanne and there was a Hispanic or black guy in front of her and a white guy behind her. And they didn't have a conversation, but you can see where the sighting is in relation to Phelps Gate. It's right there. And that's why it's widely believed, including by myself, unless law enforcement comes out and says otherwise, that she made it to her destination. She got to Phelps Gate and she dropped off the keys. We know from what has been reported, the keys were not found at the crime scene. They were not found in her possession. And I'm sure it was confirmed by law enforcement whether or not the keys had been returned. There's obviously a system to document that. Again, maybe it's out there somewhere. If you guys have seen it, please let me know. But it may be just another thing that law enforcement is not disclosing because they feel like it could be pertinent to the case. But this is what we have right now. There are other things on this map that I want to discuss, but I'm going to quickly skate over those things. Just leave them alone for now. And I'm going to zoom in on the location where she was found. This is what you're looking at right here. So a residential area, highly populated, a lot of traffic, a lot of eyes, a lot of ears, and yet that's where she's found. So something to keep in mind. Again, we're going to come back to this map at least one more time, but at least now, here's where she was found. Here's where she lived. So a little bit of a distance that she would have to get down to that location in a very short period of time. And we're going to talk about that because detectives found this to be a critical piece of information. You see, because of the distance between where she was last seen and where she was eventually found, detectives believe she couldn't have walked from Phelps Gate to the location in just over a half an hour. The walk itself would have taken at least 40 minutes, according to them. That led them to theorize that someone drove Suzanne to the intersection and that the driver most likely was someone she knew. Detectives didn't think she would have been forced into a vehicle because no one reported seeing or hearing an abduction, which suggested she entered the car willingly. And in their view, that meant she likely knew the driver. Now, I don't completely agree with that. I think it could be a little too much tunnel vision for my liking. Yeah, it would be reasonable to assume that because no one reported hearing or seeing any type of abduction that, yeah, clearly she knew the person, and they may be right. But just because someone didn't see or hear it doesn't mean it didn't happen. If they got the drop on Suzanne, if they basically went up to her and said, hey, get in the car, I got a knife or I got a gun, just because you don't hear or see it doesn't mean an abduction didn't take place. So I wouldn't put all my eggs in the basket of she knew this person because she potentially got into the car willingly. She could have gotten into the car under her own power, but only because she had no other choice. I put that out there just to keep our minds open. Detectives also learned that shortly before Suzanne was found at 9:58 p.m., witnesses heard what sounded like an argument between a man and woman in front of the apartment building at 750 Whitney Avenue, about a block from the murder scene. Not long after that, witnesses reported screams at East Rock and Edge Hill. A passing motorist heard a woman cry out, quote, "I can't believe you're doing this." Other witnesses reported that they saw a tan or brown van parked on the eastbound side of the road right beside the spot where Suzanne was later discovered. According to the New Haven Register, detectives also received a tip from an anonymous woman who said that shortly before 10 p.m., she was slowly driving near Huntington Street and Whitney Avenue, 2 blocks from where Suzanne was killed, when a man suddenly ran up to her passenger window, looked inside, and then turned and jumped over plantings in front of a nearby church, which is now a middle school. And this is one of those pieces of information where when I first heard it, I thought to myself, how was this case not solved? Because although there are coincidences, when you think about everything around this few moments, people hearing screaming, another witness hearing a woman say, "I can't believe you were doing this." And then at 9:58 p.m., Suzanne is located at this location. And then within minutes, you have a man running from the direction of the crime scene who has, as far as we know, never come forward. It's highly likely that we're talking about an individual who was either involved with whatever happened to Suzanne or is solely responsible for it. And to think that this woman got a clear line of sight and saw his face, and yet we haven't been able to identify him, it's crazy. And sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, and that may be what we're looking at here when we're talking about our suspect. So at this point, detectives had a theory about what happened to Suzanne. After she was seen at 9:25 p.m., she got into a vehicle driven by someone she knew, and she and that person got into an argument. And at that point, either before or after the argument, she exited the vehicle at East Rock and Edge Hill, and the driver exited the vehicle as well, stabbed her from behind, and then fled the scene. Vanity Fair reported that detectives believe the driver was a man, and his motive was, quote, probably jealousy or desire or anger. So with that theory and that belief, detectives began interviewing every man Suzanne knew. And one person they quickly focused on was James Vandervelde. You see, detectives had learned that although Suzanne started the semester liking James a lot, her feelings had shifted after he became her essay advisor. She felt he didn't have enough time for her, and this frustrated her immensely. She often talked with her friends about how bitter she was. And detectives thought there might be more to this story, possibly even an affair, so on December 7th, they went to James's office to speak with him. James told detectives that he had been in his office for most of the evening on December 4th. He said a friend dropped in around 6 p.m. and asked if he wanted to see a movie, but he said no because he needed to review Suzanne's essay revisions. James went on to explain that at some point after his friend left, he took a short break, walked to Ingalls Ring to watch part of a hockey game, returned to his office for a bit, and then went home to 305 Ronan Street. Now, what's important here is that his home address is 0.6 miles from where Suzanne was found. But according to James, he said he was home alone at the time that she was killed. Unfortunately for James, detectives did not believe him. Vanity Fair reported that they thought James and Suzanne were having an affair that ended badly, so he killed her. On December 8th, they brought James into the station and interrogated him for hours. He maintained his innocence and gave permission for the police to search his red Jeep Wrangler and his apartment. He also offered a blood test and a polygraph, but officers declined. They did, however, inform Yale officials that James was a suspect. After that, James hired an attorney, and I can't blame him. Within days, Yale issued a statement saying they had been told by police that James was in a, quote, pool of suspects. Yale then canceled his classes for the following semester and chose not to renew his contract. And the New Haven police? Well, they continued investigating James. In fact, they spoke with the student who saw Suzanne walking around 9:25 p.m., and she said James was the blonde man with glasses she had seen walking behind Suzanne. Detectives then brought in the witness who saw the man running near Whitney and Huntington, and they asked her whether she could identify him if she saw him again, and she said, yeah, I think I could. But she said that James was not the man she saw, and she was never contacted again by police. According to Vanity Fair, detectives still pursued the affair theory aggressively in the first few weeks, but found no evidence of a romantic relationship with Suzanne or with any of his students. He had no history of inappropriate behavior and was well liked by his students. Despite that, he remained the main suspect. And just a little side note here, as we're talking about James, I think it's important to note that during this entire investigation, where he was the quote-unquote main suspect, he maintained his top secret clearance. The government had done their own independent investigation, and they didn't think he was involved. And because he wasn't rehired at the school, he went back to work for the government. So I think that says something. And I just want to revisit that map that we were looking at earlier, because now we can fill in all the blanks on all the things I wasn't focusing on earlier, because now we have all the information. So just a quick recap. We have Suzanne's apartment here, Phelps Gate, which was her destination, the 9:25 sighting, and then instead of taking, if she was at Phelps Gate, and instead of taking a left and going back up the road towards her apartment, if you're to believe that she was in a vehicle, she would have gone down College Street, or even if you believe she was walking. And along that road, you have James's office right here. You have the Ingles ice rink, the hockey game where he went over for a little bit. So this is where he walked over, went to the hockey rink, and then went back to his office. And then if you continue down the road, take a right and a quick left, here's James's apartment right here. Okay. So not too far from the campus, not too far from his office. And then if you go 0.6 miles down the road, this is where Suzanne was found. Okay. So you can actually see them both in screen here. That's the distance. And then as far as those other witness sightings, you have the man who was seen running right about here. So if you believe that this guy is connected, makes a lot of sense here, right? You have the disturbance go down here, and then a man is running from the scene. The only question I would have with that would be, if we believe that the suspect was driving and we didn't find a vehicle abandoned near the crime scene, then why was he seen running? Where did his car go? Did he dump his car over in here somewhere or over here and then take off on foot so he could kind of hide a little bit easier in case someone saw his vehicle? Maybe, but again, police were all over this place. You would think they would have found a car that had been abandoned. You also, just to make sure we cover everything, the arguing was heard right over in this area by witnesses. So then again, all potentially connected in this one little triangle here, being connected to Suzanne. So that's our overall map. I'll zoom out here real quick so you can just get an overview. That's what you're looking at. That's the origin of this all taking place, where Suzanne leaves her apartment. That's where she ends up. These are all the things in between. So again, if you're listening on audio, I apologize. It's kind of hard to describe that in a way where you're going to be able to follow it on audio, but you can Google it, or just when you get time at home, go over to YouTube. You can pull up the link and it's going to make things a lot more clearer for you. So we have the overview now. You can see they're heavily focusing on James originally, and by 2000, no progress had been made in Suzanne's case, and Suzanne's parents were pressuring Yale to bring in outside investigators. So after enough pressure was applied, Yale hired Andrew Rosenzweig, a former chief investigator with the New York District Attorney's Office, and Patrick Harnett, a former commanding officer of the NYPD Major Crime Squad, both to review the case. According to CT Insider, Andrew and Patrick quickly uncovered crucial missteps taken by the original investigators. For example, Suzanne's fingernail scrapings had never been sent out for testing. So they submitted them, and male DNA was found underneath her nails. However, they weren't sure who it was. Andrew and Patrick also noticed that investigators had focused a lot of their attention on James. It was clear they thought he was responsible, so Andrew and Patrick reached out to James to see if he'd be willing to talk. And you would think, with everything he's been through, he would have told them to go pound sand, but it was exactly the opposite. He was fully cooperative, speaking with them for hours, even providing a DNA sample. Now that sample was compared to the DNA under Suzanne's fingernails, and shocker, it did not match. At this point, Andrew and Patrick were both convinced that James wasn't involved in Suzanne's murder. There was absolutely nothing tying him to the case, and they told authorities this and urged detectives to pursue other leads, but they didn't appear to be interested. Andrew later told the New Haven Register that he had identified around, quote, half a dozen suspects, not including James, who he believed should be investigated. He didn't elaborate on their identities. He did share one theory, though, and he didn't consider it very strong, but he wanted to put it out there. He questioned whether a terrorist could have killed Suzanne because her senior essay was on Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. Andrew went on to state, quote, I'd be looking for someone from or sympathetic with the fringe element of the Muslim Middle Eastern community who may have crossed paths with Suzanne and who she decided to confide in and tell them that she was doing research on Al-Qaeda. He stated, quote, "Maybe that person then decided to take it upon themselves to befriend her and ultimately kill her in his or her demented mind doing their part in the jihad." Andrew said that the other investigators were, quote, "universally disinterested in this theory or any others." Andrew and Patrick kept trying to get authorities to look beyond James, but nothing moved forward, so they eventually left the case. And there is still more to cover in this investigation, including how this all played out with James, and we're going to talk about it right after the break. Ever wake up sweaty, freezing, or just uncomfortable? The temperature in your bedroom can make or break your sleep, and that's why I switched to Miracle Made bed sheets. They're inspired by NASA technology and use silver-infused temperature-regulating fabric to help you sleep perfectly all night long. So if you're a hot sleeper, cold sleeper, it doesn't matter. These sheets help keep you in the comfort zone all night long, and that's what I love about them. And thanks to their antibacterial silver technology, Miracle Made sheets stay cleaner and fresher up to 3 times longer than regular sheets. That means fewer odors, fewer wash cycles, and way less laundry. And the most important part, I think, for all of us when it comes to bed sheets, they feel just as good, if not better, than sheets you'd find in 5-star hotels, but without the steep price tag. So they're smooth, they're breathable, and they're ridiculously comfortable. They're also great for your skin. All that hidden bacteria you find in regular sheets, it can clog your pores and cause breakouts. But Miracle Made Sheets' antibacterial design helps you sleep cleaner and clearer night after night. So upgrade your sleep or give the gift a better rest. Go to trymiracle.com/detective to try Miracle Made Sheets today. You'll save over 40%, and when you use my promo code, you'll get an extra 20% off plus a free 3-piece towel set. They make an amazing gift, and with a 30-day money-back guarantee, there's no risk. That's trymiracle.com/detective and use my code detective at checkout. Thanks to Miracle Made for sponsoring this episode. All right, we're back, and in 2006, Suzanne's case was turned over to Connecticut's cold case unit, and a new investigative team was assembled. They reevaluated all previously collected information and pursued new leads. As they went through the old files, they too realized that many investigative steps had never been taken. One of those critical steps was asking the witness who saw the man running near Whitney and Huntington around the same time that Suzanne was killed to help create a sketch. That had never happened, so the team re-interviewed her, and she said during this interview that the runner she saw was white, had, quote, blondish hair, chiseled features, and was wearing dark clothes and a loose-fitting green-colored jacket. He appeared physically fit, athletic, and 20 to 30 years old. Using the witness's description, a sketch was created of the runner, and it was distributed to the neighborhood and to Yale alumni groups. Now, the sketch is on the screen for you right here. You can see basically sounds exactly like the way I just described it. To me, it's a pretty good sketch. If you had someone that you were looking at for this crime, you would quickly be able to say whether or not they match the sketch. I'm looking at the guy. He's got a pretty chiseled jaw. Definitely not like me over here with my round face. So you'd be able to rule some people out pretty quickly. But I do want to qualify, we don't know definitively if this person is involved. But on the other hand, the fact that this person has never come forward, if they were just some runner who was in the area that day, who happened to live in that neighborhood, they would definitely see this sketch and go, oh shit, that's me. I need to go talk to police. And as far as we know, that's never happened. So if I'm a betting man, this guy in the sketch is somehow connected to Suzanne's murder, and more than likely, he's the sole person connected to this murder. According to the Hartford Courant, the new team also determined that the fingernail scraping sample had been contaminated and that the DNA belonged to the lab worker who had originally handled the testing, not the killer, which is a huge blow to this case. This left that Fresca can that I had mentioned earlier as one of the only remaining pieces of evidence, yet it wasn't sent off for more testing, and I cannot tell you why. So let's fast forward to 2012, because that year the investigative team received multiple tips suggesting Suzanne's killer may have been a mentally disturbed man who had been a graduate student at the Yale School of Architecture when she was murdered. This man's name has never been released, but the media refers to him as Billy, so I'm going to do the same. The New Haven Register reported that the people who knew Billy in the late 1990s believed he was mentally ill. One of them was a man named Gilles who lived at the corner of Edge Hill Avenue, 1 block from where Suzanne was found. Now, real quickly before I go on here, Gilles is spelled Gilles. I did look it up. Some people say that you pronounce it in the French way, Zeal. I don't know. I'm going to go with Gilles. I could be wrong. I apologize if I am. It's not intentional. I know you guys come at me in the comments for it, but we're going with Gilles for the sake of this conversation. And if he's watching, my bad if I got it wrong, but that's what we're going with. So Gilles told detectives that he knew Billy and he had tried for years to help him with his mental health, but he was unsuccessful. Gilles described Billy as someone who, quote, didn't know how to deal with women on an emotional level. He struggled to be in a room with women, yet, quote, he was really drawn to them. Gilles said that when Billy felt rejected, he would, quote, fly into rage. Gilles further told detectives that Billy had talked about Suzanne Jovin in the past. In October of 2011, Billy told him, quote, there is something I have to tell you. I am obsessed with the murder of Suzanne Jovin. Now, Billy did tell Gilles that this was a joke in very poor taste, but he became convinced that this quote-unquote joke caused police to suspect him of being the killer. In his mind, he thought they were trying to trap him into confessing. Then on one day in 2012, Billy called an attorney friend, Alan Rosner, and asked him about transferring his condo to his niece through a will. According to the New Haven Register, when Alan asked why he was suddenly worried about a will, Billy hesitated and said, quote, they're out to get me. Later that same day, Billy died after being hit by a car on the highway. His death was ruled an accident, but the people who knew him have questioned if it was actually a suicide. Because of Billy's statements and his mental health history, Gilles and Alan believed he could be responsible for Suzanne's murder. They looked into him further and noticed his yearbook photo resembled the sketch of the Running Man. They further noted that Billy was an avid runner and often wore a, quote, loose-fitting greenish jacket similar to the one described by the witness. After these discoveries, Gilles and Alan went to the chief state attorney and asked them to investigate Billy. According to the attorney's office, they did look into him, but did not make, quote, any connection that would warrant any action. And even with all this additional information coming out, authorities continued to treat James as the main suspect, and he eventually had enough, so he filed lawsuits against the city of New Haven and Yale, and both lawsuits were settled and he received hundreds of thousands of dollars. And shortly after those settlements, the New Haven Register asked the state's attorney whether James was no longer considered a suspect, and he responded, quote, I think that's fair to say. He declined to answer any follow-up questions, and I think we all understand why. By 2018, the investigative team reviewing Suzanne's murder had been disbanded, and the chief state's attorney was overseeing the case through the cold case unit. And he made some big moves, bringing in the FBI, reviewing all physical evidence, and resubmitting Suzanne's clothing for touch DNA testing. But as far as I can tell as I sit here right now, no results have ever been publicly released. The attorney told the New Haven Register that despite years of investigation, key questions remained, including where was Suzanne intending to go when she walked through Phelps Gate that night, and how did she get to the corner of East Rock and Edge Hill some 20 minutes later? I also noticed that there were some unresolved questions that the attorney didn't mention, like why investigators still hadn't tested the DNA on the Fresca can. As I mentioned very early in this episode, there's an unidentified palm print. Who does it belong to? Maybe they couldn't get anything at that time, but with the advancements in science and technology today, specifically pertaining to DNA, it's definitely worth a shot. Now let's fast forward again to December of 2023, which marked the 25th anniversary of Suzanne's murder. At that time, CT Insider published a long article about the case, and the chief state's attorney provided a brief update stating the investigation was still open and active. Unfortunately, that is the most recent update we have in Suzanne's case. December 4th, which just passed, marked 27 years since she was murdered. 27 years without any answers for the family or the community. Let's not let it get to 28. All right, so let's dive into this perspective. I'm going to elaborate on some of the things I talked about in the episode. I'm going to talk about some different things that I didn't mention and wanted to save them till the end. And overall, I want to give the call to action because that's really what we're looking for here. We're looking for someone to finally come forward with the information we need to finally solve this investigation. So, a couple bullet points I want to hit. First off, she was fully clothed. She had her jewelry on and a watch. To me, that suggests it was not a sexual assault. It was not a robbery. That's one thing to note. The second thing I want to talk about is Suzanne's actual injuries. So she has the 17 stab wounds to the head, the neck, and the back, and then the slit to the throat. This reminds me a lot of Nicole Brown Simpson in the OJ case. I believe that the 17 stab wounds were the actual attack, and the slit of the throat was insurance to make sure that she didn't survive. The suspect wanted to make sure that she wasn't able to identify him later. That still doesn't mean she knew him or it doesn't mean she didn't know him. It just means that she got a clear look at his face, and if she was able to overcome the injuries to her back, neck, and head, and she saw him again, she would be able to point him out. So this person ensured that that wasn't going to be the case. And as far as the stab wounds themselves, it kind of aligns with whatever theory you believe, but with the ending being her jumping out of the car, whether that was because she had gotten into an argument and was just walking away and didn't expect the attack, or something else, which I'm going to talk about in a few seconds here. Just stick with me. Now we have to talk about the crime scene, right? Where she was in relation to where she was last seen. We can all agree she didn't get there on foot. So we know that she got into a vehicle. The question is with who, and even more importantly, why? Because if we can figure that out, then we can kind of narrow down what actually happened here. What do I mean by that? If this was someone that she knew, then she got in the car willingly and was driving somewhere because she thought she was going to a secondary location. However, if she didn't get in the car willingly, then that would mean that she didn't feel comfortable with the person driving, which to me suggests she didn't know this individual. But I had said earlier, people assume that if she got into a car, she must have knew this person. I disagree. I think it's still possible that she got into a vehicle under her own power, but not willingly. She got into the car because she felt like she had no other choice. And if you believe that theory, everything that you hear afterward, as far as a man and woman screaming and a woman allegedly screaming, "I can't believe you're doing this," that could all still be true. She could be saying, "I don't know why you're doing this. Why are you holding me at knife point? Why are you holding me at gunpoint? Why are you making me leave with you?" This could all still be true, and yet she doesn't know this person from a hole in the wall. And I think the fact that she told the person directly, "I'm going to drop off the keys and I'm going back to my apartment," aligns more with the theory that she had no intentions on being picked up by anyone she knew. She was walking back home. If she had someone who was going to pick her up that she knew, why wouldn't they just have picked her up at her apartment and saved her the walk down to Phelps? Doesn't make sense that she would walk to Phelps and then have someone pick her up. So yes, is it possible that while walking from Phelps, she saw someone she knew and got in the car? Of course. But then you have to believe that she got in this car with this person willingly because she knew them. And then within a matter of minutes after getting in the car with someone who she considered a friendly, everything goes to shit. And it results in this person stabbing her 17 times right on a main road. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You know what that sounds like to me? It sounds like a person who was forced to get into a car, had a brief conversation with this person, trying to de-escalate the situation, trying to calm them down, trying to relate to them to get them to let her to leave. And when she realized it wasn't going to work, as soon as she had the opportunity to flee the vehicle, that's what she attempted to do. And when she did, the suspect, realizing that he was caught and she was going to be able to identify him later, got out of the vehicle, stabbed her 17 times, and then slit her throat and fled the area. The one thing I can't wrap my head around is the running man. If this guy was in a car and he fled the area in his vehicle, how did he end up on foot? There might be something that I'm missing here, a piece of the puzzle that I just don't have, or it's also a small possibility that the running man is not connected to the crime And if that's the case, we're just looking at a red herring. I truly don't know the answer. I always try to paint a picture and apply my theory to the overall scenario based on the facts we do know. And I'll be honest with you guys, I don't know how the running man fits into the scenario, whether it was someone she knew or someone who was a complete stranger. And that's kind of where I'm at in this case. The suspect pool, as far as I'm concerned, is wide open. Yes, it could be someone she knew and was very close to, or it could be a complete stranger who was admiring her from a distance, had never conversated with her before, saw her that day alone, and thought it was an opportunity to act on an impulse that they maybe had for days, months, or even years. And unfortunately for him, he picked the wrong one because Suzanne chose not to be a victim. And once she realized that this was not going to end well, she refused to go to that secondary location. And she took her fate into her own hand. And unfortunately, in this situation, it didn't work out. But that's not her fault. And I'll say this, the fact that we're 27 years into this, you have to imagine at this point, every male figure in her life has been identified and looked into and potentially spoken to. The fact that we haven't connected any of them to a witness account or the sketch leads me to believe that it's more likely that this is someone she didn't know, someone that we haven't identified, and unfortunately may have no previous connections to Suzanne. Now, again, that's just speculation on my part. Could come out tomorrow that this was a close friend of hers. But to me, it feels like this theory hasn't been investigated as thoroughly as the theory that she knew her attacker. And if that's the case, that's the problem. So where do we go from here? There's not much I can provide. All I will say is that the Fresca can, it needs to be thoroughly tested. With all the new advancements in DNA, you have to apply all of them to this one little can in the hopes that there's something today that can extract DNA from that palm print if it was preserved correctly and allow us to finally identify who that palm print belongs to. It can only be a couple people. Now, there is a possibility it came from a store clerk or someone who manufactured the can, but the fact that her fingerprints are on there, in addition to this male palm print, it might be the only piece of information we have left that can actually make a difference in this case. So if that hasn't been done yet, it needs to be done yesterday. And as always with these cases that involve DNA, if anybody connected to this investigation, whether it's a government entity or a family member, if they know for certain that this can hasn't been fully tested and they're looking for financial assistance, I am always willing to help out with that. We do have Criminal Coffee, and that's what we do. That's why we started Criminal Coffee. So I'm more than willing to help out to make sure that we have dotted all of our I's, crossed all of our T's, and there's nothing else that we can do to potentially bring this case to an end. But if for whatever reason the can doesn't pan out, what do? We keep fighting. We keep talking about Suzanne and her case until we know who's responsible for this and they're held accountable. And that may require one of you out there to come forward with the critical piece of information that we need to finally solve this case. So just to recap, 21-year-old Suzanne Jovin was last seen around 9:25 p.m. on December 4th, 1998, walking near Phelps Gate on Yale's campus in New Haven, Connecticut. At 9:58 p.m., Suzanne was found stabbed to death near the corners of East Rock and Edge Hill Roads, roughly 2 miles from Phelps Gate. Detectives determined she could not have walked there in the available time and believe she was driven to that location by someone she knew. That person has not been identified, and Suzanne's murder remains unsolved. Anyone with information in Suzanne's case is asked to contact the Jovin Investigation Team tip line at 866-623-8058, or they can email jovin.case@ct.gov. There is a $150,000 reward available. As always, my final words go out to the friends and family of Suzanne, specifically her parents, Thomas and Donna. I don't care if your child is 2 or 27, it's still your baby. And you sent her off to a prestigious school where you thought she was setting the foundation for her future, and yet you're dealing with this 27 years later. It's not right. It's not fair. All I can tell you is you're not alone. And I'm not talking about just law enforcement. I'm talking about this community. A lot of people already know about this case, and now even more do. And we're here fighting with you every step of the way. We're not going anywhere. And if there's anything I can do to help you, especially with the DNA testing, please let me know. I'm easy to find. I hope at some point I do get the opportunity to sit right here and tell all of you that we have found the person responsible and they're finally being held accountable. Until that day comes, everyone stay safe out there, and I'll see you soon.